Well, thank you very much, Doctor, for that wonderful, inspiring lecture. We're going to collect questions from the floor. We'll have three questions first, and then we'll have another round afterwards. So, Doctor, can line up with the mic there, and then can put forward your questions.
Thank you, Professor Chandra Muzaffar. That was very great presentation, and I like when you begin, when you almost conclude with message from Ali Imran 1.4. Walatakum minkum ummatun yad'una ila al-khairi wa ya'muruna bil ma'rufi wa yanhauna 'anil munkar wa ulaika humul muflihun. Several points that you mentioned is very great for us to understand about human rights, that we need to be critical on our understanding about human rights, about what the West did to people in Asia, Africa, and something like that, and also the need to reconceptualize our understanding of human rights. The stories that you mentioned about the killing of people in America, in Australia, the Indian people in America, in Asia, in Australia, in Vietnam, and also the killing of people in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other countries remind us that people who talk a lot about human rights, the West, also did perhaps abuses the basic of human rights, that is the life of people. But this is not a question. I'm just afraid that by saying that we become, put the blame on the issue of human rights to the West and forgetting the plight and also perhaps the right, the victims of discrimination of people around us. And we remember that killing one people is the same as the killing of all humanity. And we know around us there are a number of communities, people have been discriminated, abused, and even persecuted, exterminated. And if we are trying to shift the discussion to the issue of the general issue, that's I agree with that one. But sometimes it's become a justification for some people to forget about the issues around us, and then also accusing that the West not having any right to talk about this issue because they are actually the people who did the discrimination, the abuses of human rights, so they have no right to talk about this one. And I'm also afraid that perhaps this issue can be used by the people, at the Council of Ulama, like in Indonesia or in other countries. That what we are doing is far less than what they are doing. So it's we are not doing something wrong, and perhaps less than what they are doing. So this become a justification again for some people to not obeying human rights, not considering the lives and the rights of the plight of people around them. So that's the only concern of me. Thank you very much.
Assalamualaikum, I'm Izzat. Thank you for the very enlightening lecture. And I got maybe 3 questions for Prof. Chandra. The first one is actually you mentioned about the colonial of the Australian people and even the Native American and how they treat the Aborigines like animals. So my question is related to the Palestine experience, because when they want to colonize Palestine, the Nazis, they use the Jewish text and they treat the Aborigines as if they are like animals, and like that confer them the right to exterminate and maybe discriminate the original Aborigine people. So my question is, it's not when we talk about global perspective, it's not the recommendation, for example, by Noam Chomsky about the BDS movement, boycott, diversify and sanction, should it not actually be taken up by like the countries? Because right now they have the moral upstanding already. They know that Israel is doing injustice to Palestine, but they are not taking up the BDS movement as like a solution for the one of the solution for the Palestine question. So maybe maybe because of the US hegemony behind Israel or something. And the second one is about you mentioned about the Vietnam War and the Iraq War. So my question is related to the currency of truth, because you mentioned, for example, the Vietnam War is based on a lie. So, and it's related to actually maybe it's vulgar, like bullshitting by Henry J. Frankfurt. So it's like the currency is true, but the currency is very low. So, and they based on false lie to propagate war. So my question is, should not people actually put an action on ground base, maybe on mass movement? For example, like Muhammad Ali, very famous for his resistance to war. Actually, he doesn't even mention like it's based on a lie, but based on justice, and he doesn't want to participate in a war. So maybe should not people, although the Congress passed the law like to go to war, should not like based on the ground level moral standing. So the third one is actually based on your ending statement. There's a change right now. This is related to the solidarity, because for example, the Uyghur oppression is not people know they are being oppressed, but the high elites, the ruling elites, they are not in solidarity with the oppressed people, but the normal Muslim, they know and they doesn't agree with it. So maybe is it not the economic factor, maybe because like China is a big country? So that is.
Thank you, Doctor, for your lecture. As you were talking about, as you were delivering your lecture, one of the things that jumped out the most at me was when you talked about the need to revisit and reconceptualize human rights, and in particular doing this from a viewpoint that synthesizes the philosophies and the major religions from around the world. Because in particular you mentioned kind of not necessarily reconceptualizing, but revisiting human rights from the Islamic perspective and through the philosophy of the Islamic civilization. So I have two related questions to this. In your opinion, what would this reconceptualized human right or revisited human right look like? Would it be human rights as it is now, kind of re-rendered in Islamic terminology, or would it be a far deeper revisitation? What would that look like? And do you think that might there be fundamental difficulties in certain aspects? I mean, I don't believe that there would be, but do you think that there might be changes, unexpected changes to what we understand as human rights now, not only through the Islamic revisit, but also from the other great philosophies of around the world? So I would kind of like to see what you think the new human right order, I guess, would look like maybe 20 years down the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good questions and comments. Yeah. I'll be brief in responding to them. I always say that at the beginning, but I'll try to be brief, not too elaborate in my answers. The first question about the danger that this sort of discourse, our friend from Indonesia had asked this, that it be used to justify our own wrongdoings, or to say, well, we're not that bad, these others have been worse than us and all the rest of it. Yes, the danger is there. But the way we have to address this challenge, if, for instance, we know that terrible wrongdoings have taken place in the past and continue to happen today, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq, which are all contemporary, current tragedies. We stand up against these things. It would not for one moment dissuade us from criticizing the wrongdoings in our own midst, committed by our own kind, by our own leaders. If they do things that are wrong, we have to say so. Even if an organization or an individual cannot address each and every wrongdoing, we can at least support what others are doing. And that, I think, should be the attitude. That should be the right approach. Don't downplay the wrongdoings in your own midst. To give you an analogy, it's like this. You are concerned about, say, rape and torture at the national or global level. But if, let's say, suddenly you come to know that your neighbor has done something that is wrong, very similar to what you have been criticizing, I think you have a duty to go and tell your neighbor that it's wrong, try to correct it, even though it's going to be different, because the person is your neighbor, someone with whom you've had good relations perhaps, but you suddenly hear that he has done something that is wrong. It's your duty. You're doing it for his sake, actually, but you have to do it in a different way. So likewise, wrongdoings in your own country, you have to stand up. But sometimes the approach may be a bit different. Like, if, let's say, I have to deal with certain things that are happening in Malaysia today, and they may be linked to, say, the present government, my approach may be a bit different from how I would have criticized the previous government about some of their wrongdoings, because they had been in power for much longer. They had opportunities to do things in a different way, but they failed to. Here it is a government that has been around for just 1 year. My approach is bound to be a bit different. But that's understandable. That's the way it should be. Rather than just sort of say, oh, we would blast you and make sure that you are brought down tomorrow. It's not the way to do it. So there has to be an understanding of the situation, but nonetheless you must remain committed to certain truths. For instance, I was disappointed with the present government when it failed to act against its own kind. Some of their own ministers and deputy ministers were using false titles. It's quite a serious thing. You don't have a certain degree and you claim to have a certain degree. You didn't go to a certain university, you claim to have gone to that university. I think it happens in different parts of the world. It happens in Indonesia too, right? Things of that sort. But you have to speak up. So we spoke up against that sort of thing. But one wouldn't say, because of this, you better resign tomorrow. It's wrong, you point out it's wrong, you say it should not be done, apologize for it, whatever. But you're not going to say, relinquish your power. A different approach. but wrongdoings very similar in other parts of the world, happening globally, and you feel that you have to take a stand, you take a stand, maybe even firmer. It's again conditioned by circumstance. Each situation you have to look at it very carefully. But don't ever justify things that are happening which should be condemned. They should be condemned, condemn them. Right? Whether it is in your neighborhood or at the global level. The second question, in fact, series of 3 questions about Palestine first. Our friend who asked the question about Palestine, that the Zionists had used the Nazi justification to colonize Palestine. Actually, what had happened was not exactly what you had suggested. There was a certain degree of collusion between the Nazis and the Zionists. Ironical as it may sound, it's true, I'm sure you're aware of it. There was a certain degree of collusion, which is amazing, isn't it? Because the Nazis were supposed to be against the Jews, right? And yet they were, that's right, colluding at a certain level. That's true. But I think the real issue here is something else. Some of the Jewish leaders, the Zionists, who colonized or occupied Palestine, they argued that Palestine was a land without a people. So what they said was a people without a land, meaning by which the Jews, right? The Jews didn't have a land after they had been exiled 2 or 3 times in history. That the Jews didn't have a land, so here a people without a land were coming to a land without a people. You see the way they argued? That was a false argument. That is a typical colonial argument, saying that there was no one in Palestine. There was no country, no nationality called Palestine, which is not true at all. If they are right, I mean, the easiest way of answering that is, why do you think the colonialists, Britain and France in particular, why did they give the mandate to Palestine to Britain in 1917 after the Balfour Declaration? The mandate was given to Palestine. We didn't exist. Why did you give the mandate to Britain to control, to take charge of Palestine? So it's a lie, and they know it is a lie. That Palestine existed, there were people there identified as Palestinians, right? They were Arabs, and that has remained their identity to this day. And there were farms, there were agricultural activities in particular, and they were doing quite well. So it's not as if they didn't exist. This is a lie. So this thing about going to a land without a people is a typical colonial argument. When they colonized Australia, that's what they said. No people. I suppose in their mind, those were not people. They were kangaroos, you see. They were not people. So you had a right to just wipe them out. And they said the same thing about the Americas. About Americas, they didn't draw the kangaroo analogy. But nonetheless, in the Americas, it was said that Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas. Mind you, these are lands, South and Central America, where you had rich civilizations, the Aztec, the Incas civilization for thousands of years. There were people who had a script, who had built towns, who had tools, technological tools of different kinds. And yet, these Western colonizers could say that these are people who didn't exist. Now that is a colonial way of thinking. That point has to be made. Coming to a land without a people, or people who didn't exist, no history, nothing. That is a typical colonial argument. This is why I'm repulsed every time I hear a local, including Malaysian academics, Malaysian journalists, say stupid things. And I say that again, stupid things. I seldom use such terms in public. Saying stupid things like Penang was founded by Francis Light. Yeah? What a stupid thing. You think Penang didn't exist before Francis Light? There were people living there, Malays, Siamese, Chinese. This is a historical fact. And there were Malays who had established communities in different parts of Penang, viable communities for hundreds of years. And then Light came there as a colonial adventurer, deceived the Sultan of Kedah, which is my home state, right? And then set up his power base in Penang. So I used to tell my students when I was lecturing in Penang, in University of Science, Malaysia, I used to tell them it is not Francis Light who discovered Penang. It is the people of Penang who discovered him standing on their shore. Woke up one morning and suddenly there was this lighter standing on their shore. So the people of Penang discovered Light, not Light who discovered Penang. You know? So same thing with Raffles. Now, a friend from Singapore is not here. I mean, there is another great lie, but what made it worse was in the case of Singapore. You know, after Singapore separated from Malaysia, shortly after that, Lee Kuan Yew, the late Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's leader, he installed Stamford Raffles as the founder of Singapore and eulogized, you know, the thing about, you know, Singapore being founded by Raffles and so on. In fact, I think this year they're celebrating 200 years of Singapore's founding by Raffles, which again it's an utter lie. This is an utter lie. Singapore had been there before. Singapore was part of the Johor Riau Empire. It's a historical fact. Singapore is related to names like Sang Nila Utama, and Temasek was its historical name. And now there is, I think, a little bit of recognition of those
Sang Nila
aspects.
Utama.
Yeah, Sang Nila Utama, you know, a little bit of recognition of those things. But Singapore tried to wipe out that aspect of history, which is very unfair to history, unfair to what had happened in this region, unfair to the Malays of Singapore. So I think we have to keep these things in mind. Yeah, that point about when they go around colonizing and the things they say about their colonialism and their power, as if people had no history, they had no memory, they had no achievements, nothing. Yeah. Now, you mentioned this thing about resistance. Maybe it's better if one adopted like Muhammad Ali's approach, you know. You popularize resistance that way. To some extent, yes. Because of his personality, because of the impact his sports had, and he had, it did have a positive impact. You know, Muhammad Ali seen as someone resisting the draft, resisting the US rule in Vietnam and so on. But you need different forms of resistance. That's one way. It's good, it's effective. He was a brave man for doing that, you know, yeah. I have no quarrel with the Vietnamese, he said, you know, with the Viet Cong. Why do I have to go and fight them? That was what, you know, Ali said in his very humorous way. I have no quarrel with them, right? So it helped. But there are other ways. I think seminars, books, mass mobilization, political action, all those things will have to take place. There's never been resistance of just one kind. It always takes on a variety of expressions, and that's something you have to keep in mind. Your third question, brother, was that somehow economic elites, or those who are better to do, like in the case of the Arabs, they don't seem to be that much against, say, Israel compared to the ordinary people, right? This is what you were saying. I think it's true. It is true. And it has something to do with their vested interests. It is vested interest, it's their power. That's why they behave that way. If you look at a certain prince in Saudi Arabia, how close he is to the Israeli elite, it is just unbelievable. It's partly business, and maybe other reasons too, you know. But elites have behaved that way, not just in the Arab world, but everywhere. They have behaved that way. Elites as against the masses, against people. And ordinary people, they have a deeper sense of justice. They can see the truth. I still remember a conversation that I had many, many years ago in Morocco, outside Rabat, with a taxi driver. And I could see how much passion he had for the Palestinian struggle compared to some of the elites. For them it was just one of the things that they talk about without much commitment. So I think ordinary people have shown tremendous passion. And if you look at the Palestinian struggle and even other things that have happened since Iraq and so on, it is the ordinary people who are more committed, not the elites. The Arab elites as a whole have been a great, great disappointment. They've been a great, great disappointment. And it is something which many of us have been concerned about for a long while. The last question, about the reconceptualization of human rights. How would it look like? Would it be something which has got an Islamic flavor or Islamic, root? It is difficult to say at this stage. But maybe even the term human rights, we'll have to rethink, perhaps, in that sort of context. But if the concern is with justice, I think justice will figure prominently in this reconceptualization. If the concern is with human dignity, that will figure prominently in this reconceptualization. That is what is more important, the substance. The name, the phraseologies that we use, those will be secondary, I think. It is our commitment to the substance that really matters. And I'm saying that there is perhaps a need for that, partly because of the way in which human rights has been abused by people who are supposed to be the champions of human rights, which is why we held that conference in 1994. We were attacked, left, right, and center for holding that conference. See, one of the things that they're very unhappy about, it's not in some of these books, it is in an earlier book of mine. We had some of our critics telling us, how can, Dr. Chandra invite his jailer, meaning by which Dr. Mahathir, how can he invite his jailer to open that conference? Now, the irony of it, that some of those who were so active in attacking me at that time, they're all now with him. They're all now with the jailer. I've never ever been that close to the jailer, if you want to know, right? But they're all now very, very close to him, right? And at that time they attacked me, But I explained at that time, as I still do, when I try to explain to people that conference that we held, it was called Rethinking Human Rights, that conference. In the end, the book was called Human Wrongs. You know why we called it Rethinking Human Rights? It is because of the terrible hypocrisy shown by the Western powers. Said, you are the great champions of human rights. Look at your hypocrisy. And why that hypocrisy? Because of Bosnia. This is 1994. This is right at the height of the conflict in the former Yugoslavia, the sufferings of the Bosnians. And this is the reason why we invited Dr. Mahathir. Dr. Mahathir was one of the very few leaders in the world, including, if you look at all the Muslim countries that were directly affected by Bosnia, Mahathir spoke up on the rights of the Bosnian people. And because of his stand, apart from other reasons, but this was certainly one of the reasons, some of the big powers were forced to change their position on Bosnia. So we held that conference for that reason, because of what was happening at the global level. But these friends of ours, they're all friends actually. they all turned against us because they said, oh, inviting Mahathir, holding this conference and criticizing the West for its failure and so on, they just couldn't accept it. But yes, we have to reconceptualize, but keep in mind it's about justice and human dignity. That is what is important. The name, the title doesn't really matter.
We're going to start another round of questions, but I'm going to abuse my position as a moderator to start with the first questions. This is not abuse of human rights, by the way. I mean, when I listen to Dr. Charles Muzaffar's surveys of issues of human rights and human wrongs as well, I was reminded of one line from Capital that says, between equal rights, the forces decide. And this is to say that our struggles to champion human rights and human rights in general, its level of practice and in theory as well, has always danced to the music of the forces of empire in many ways. And then I wanted to connect to the last comment that you had, that you mentioned during the lecture. That is that the shift of power, where the West are declining and there's a rise of China and Russia, is a new opportunity. I wanted to ask you to elaborate on that, because considering that China and Russia has a bad track record in human rights as well, so how does you see this movement as an opportunity in a way? That's the first part. The second part of the question is, it's connected to the Mahathir's comments as well, because when you talk about trying to introduce the dimensions of spirituality and religion into the discussion, into the conversations on human rights, are we also risking the idea of culturalizing human rights? And we have the cases of Mahathir where it's Asian human rights, where I can jail people. One of them is you. In the past, I can jail people because of to protect the stability of the society. Blah blah blah. It's an Asian human rights thing. So how are we facing that risk as well when we venture into this cultural civilization, in fact, of human rights, which are more vast and sometimes can be quite ambiguous as well? Okay, that's my questions.
I'm Azhar Ibrahim. Thank you, Prof, for your insightful lecture. The first question is, those that you mentioned resonate or remind us of the discourse on mythology and transformative common humanity by P.T. Sorokin, Eric Fromm, and those. But I want to link to today's academia, in academic circles. This very kind of language is no longer fashionable. In fact, it's not even part of the curriculum today. Your generation benefited, I'm sure, at the Department of Malay Studies, with Professor Naratas and a few others. At that time, they were all talking about those things, right? And I think you developed it in more contextual terms. But today I see, in fact, if you look at the journals, publication, and so on, nobody talking about this. In fact, it seems like, it's too moral, yeah? It's too moral, too unscientific, and it's too idealistic. And therefore, the moment, let's say, we bring this one article, just short article, to introduce, students find it's not challenging because it's not theoretical. Okay? It's very strange. Yeah? It's something which is mind-boggling. Students are looking for difficult theories in class. Yeah? Because I teach few courses, in trans-campus kind of thing, and student feedback is that we want a challenging theories. Yeah? So theory becomes, including even to talk about human rights, they want kind of like model A, model B, model C kind of human rights, high loaded with terms and terminologies, but none of them have any passion about the human wrongs. So this is a very irritating, to a point that I was thinking, am I sick? Right? Like to talk about this, right? Almost alone in campus. Yeah, that's one. And two,
I think there's one that we often heard in the Malay language discourse on concept hak kemanusiaan. Yeah? And then of course loaded with Islamic terms and so on. Perspektif Islam tentang hak kemanusiaan. So instead of talking about human rights, they are telling that Islam has a better human rights. And I know these circles are not interested with human rights. They're just interested that Islam has more better things to offer human rights, right, than the West. So I think this part, we have not really tackled. Yeah? I know you did your master, you did your PhD at Malay Studies, and you wrote your fabulous works and so on. But Prof, I'm coming from Malay Studies. I noted that many of your work, which is available in English, but within the Malay Studies core, which is of great intake in Malaysian university too, at least in UM and UKM, none of your actually work are mentioned by this group. And these are the very Malay Studies group that produce political leaders and bureaucrats, and even activists. And none of them being touched by the things that you have deliberated very critically in the Malaysian discourse. I don't think not because they cannot read in English, but because of the non-present, non-existent viable discourse in Bahasa Melayu, somehow these things are not carried forward. So this is my concern. I'm not saying that you have not done your job in the Malay discourse, because you have done very well, but I think we need more of this kind of thing within the Malay speaking. We must take note that all of us are all bilingual here, but there's one group out there which is very powerful too, and they hold a number of positions and institutions, that their discourse is actually monolingual, and they lost touch with all these critical things. How can we go to the other side? I'm on both sides actually, I would say. And when I go the other side, they say, Azhar, you're not really Malay Studies. Right? So when I come on this side, the people say, oh, Azhar, you too Melayu. So this is my lamentations. Thank you, Prof.
Assalamualaikum, Prof. So saya cuma nak bercakap berkenaan dengan pemahaman hak dalam dalam from linguistic perspective, because we just me and my friends just try to Google out how the connotation of hak, rights, and also hukuk atau al-haq in Arabic. So it seems that why Malay, this is like somehow like saya berkata pemahaman yang saya dapat lah. Hak dalam konotasi Melayu lebih kepada pemilikan. Bila kita cakap rights in English, is more about related to justice and truth and right things to do. And al-hukuk in Arabic is also the same, related to justice. So I think the reason why when we talk about human rights ataupun hak kemanusiaan dalam komuniti Melayu, dia susah nak terima ataupun dia rasa benda bermasalah. Sebab dia nampak hak tu adalah we talk about yang dia nampak hak adalah bersifat selfish, bersifat pemilikan, bersifat nak rebut sesuatu ataupun nak tuntut keistimewaan. So I think since this is also based ataupun rooted from linguistic punya angle juga, saya harap kita boleh tackle juga from this side so that we don't kita tidak terlepas sisi-sisi yang penting supaya kita boleh tackle macam mana kita nak memahamkan komuniti Melayu khususnya tentang hak kemanusiaan. So itu sahaja daripada saya.
Again, with some very good comments. The first one is about the rise of China and Russia. Since these countries do not have stellar human rights records as understood conventionally, would their rise, I suppose this is the intention behind this question, yeah? Would their rise impact negatively upon human rights as such? I think the way in which human rights has been understood in the last so many decades, that itself is problematic. It is problematic because I think the dominant liberal, inverted commas, West has succeeded in equating human rights with individualized civil and political rights. That's the dominant discourse. So if you tell them that other societies have outstanding accomplishments when it comes to rights, but not the way they see it, they are taken aback. Let me narrate a personal episode to support this. Many, many years ago, I'm trying to remember which particular year, it was in 1993, in Cambodia. At that time, the UN was still running Cambodia. You remember? After the great disaster, the sufferings and so on. And I was invited by actually a Buddhist group to give a talk, a progressive Buddhist group on, well, basically intercivilizational dialogue and all that. And one of the things they organized was a talk to the UN officials serving in Cambodia. It was almost completely white, the audience. And I thought that I would try to shock them. So what I did was, I said, the three greatest achievements in human rights since the Second World War all belong to the non-Western world. I said, number one, if you look at civil and political rights that they're very fond of, so the greatest achievement, civil and political rights, that they can identify with very easily, the right to vote. It is both a civil and political right, the right to vote. That right to vote, the greatest achievement is India, the right to vote. It extended the right to vote from 1947 to the weakest of the weak in their society, to the poorest of the poor. The untouchables, those who were discriminated in their day-to-day lives in India, they all had the right to vote. That's a fact. So unlike, I said, the United States of America, that only gave a big portion of the black African population in the South the right to vote in 1965. Can you beat that? Only in 1965 they had the right to vote. This is after the civil rights movement. But India, right from the word go. So that is the greatest achievement in terms of civil and political rights. I said economic and social rights. This is 1993. I said the greatest achievement belongs to China. Why? The ability to feed so many millions of people. At that time, it is not the statistic that is quoted so often these days. China lifted 700 million people out of poverty as a result of its transformation. That was at the beginning, those years. But nonetheless, it was beginning to make an impact in 1993. And I said that is a great achievement, that they've been able to feed such a huge population. No famine during all those years, the famines were earlier, but this was an achievement of the Chinese. So economic and social rights, the greatest achievement within a country, such a huge percentage of the population, food, education, and so on. China. And I said the third, cultural rights. These are all part of the human rights documents, right? I said the third, cultural rights. So the greatest achievement, the ability of people of different cultures to live together without bloodshed. So it belongs to my country, Malaysia. So that is the greatest achievement. In many other parts of the world, they are not able to live together. But we have been able to live together, and we have avoided what I regard as the biggest shortcoming in inter-ethnic relations is violence. When they commit violence, then the relationship is broken down. But Malaysia, with the exception of the 1969 riot, where about 200 odd people died, which is terrible. I mean, every life is precious, but nonetheless, we have been free of communal violence, partly because of the way we manage ethnic relations and a number of other factors linked to the economy, to politics and so on. So I said these are the three great achievements. They don't belong to the West. See, and yet you spend all your time talking about human rights and you violate human rights at the same time, you know. So that's why, brother, whether China has done well or Russia has done well and so on is very subjective. It's they who have told the world that this is their record and this is our record and we are the greatest when it comes to human rights, and yet you know that this is not true. It is not true. They violated human rights in numerous areas. Of course, they're great achievements. Codifying human rights, giving human rights an institutional face, these are great achievements, but nonetheless, their failure is equating human rights with civil and political rights and making it very individualized human rights. That is because of the impact of this very individualized notion of culture in the West that has influenced and infected human rights, a very individualized notion. So I think I would be a bit cautious about comparing their position with that of China and Russia. Things will change in both these countries. I think it is remarkable that Russia has elections where people from non-state parties have done well. They have managed to do well in Moscow, in some of the cities and so on. You know, there have been instances of that sort. Yeah. Of course, Putin is very popular in Russia, but you can't hold that against him. Good reasons why he's popular. Among the many reasons why Putin is very popular is because they feel that he restored their dignity as a people after what Yeltsin had done. Boris Yeltsin, who we know was president for a while, drunk most of the time, you know, which is very important. Because he was drunk, he could not function as a president. And he gave in to the West very, very easily. But Putin, when he took over, he changed things. He stood up and he told them that you can't bully us. Mind you, the Soviet Union was the biggest in terms of land mass nation in the world. Of course, even today Russia is the biggest single country in the world. But at that time it was really big. And it was a power. And suddenly it crumbled. Largely because, I think, of, a variety of reasons, but the mistakes made by Russian leaders and also US propaganda and pressure played a very big role. Radio Free Europe and the constant propaganda and the way they undermined the Soviet Union. We are digressing a bit, but you know, if the Soviet Union had not made the huge mistake of falling into the American trap in Afghanistan, it was an American trap. Now we know for a fact that the Americans trapped the Soviet Union. They were the ones who were instigating the religious elements to go against government in Kabul at that time, which had the support of the people. But the religious elements, all the while, you know, that this is an ungodly government and all the rest of it, because it was left. The government was left as a way of undermining the government, and in the end, the government had to face this sort of so-called Islamic uprising, which was basically the conservatives. You have to read this book called The Grand Chessboard by Brzezinski. Brzezinski is a very important figure. He's passed away now in US politics. He was advisor to Jimmy Carter, Brzezinski. He wrote this book, if I may repeat, called The Grand Chessboard. And in that book, he argues very convincingly that they wanted Afghanistan, the US, wanted Afghanistan to become the Soviet Union's Vietnam. In other words, it would sap the Soviet Union. And this is what happened. Because of the involvement in Afghanistan, 60,000 soldiers were killed. And the revolt within Russia is closely linked to the Afghan failure. especially the states of Central Asia. They became disenchanted, they stood up against Moscow, because many of the soldiers who died were actually from Central Asia. Many of them were Muslims actually, the soldiers in the Soviet army who died in Afghanistan. And it was a total fiasco, the involvement in Afghanistan. So that plus other factors, changes in society and so on. So they went through a very difficult period, and that's why the need to restore their dignity, and why Putin is very popular, and I think he has used that popularity to strengthen his nation, to give his nation that pride. I mean, he's a great strategist. I think in the next few days there'll be a meeting of two strategists. Putin is having a meeting with Dr. Mahathir in Vladivostok, in eastern Russia. And so Putin, I think, has played a role in restoring their dignity, which is important. For people, it is not just human rights in the individualized civil and political sense. Dignity counts a lot. If you can deliver dignity and you can deliver justice, you would be much more popular than someone who just protects certain rights in the civil and political sense. That's what people value, right? So I think we have to keep that in mind, yeah? Well, you're from Singapore.
Malaysia.
Oh, you're from Malaysia, sorry, yeah? So who are the others? I know Azhar from Singapore, right? Azhar, Malay studies, and and we, I think, had the benefit of the same teacher in some ways. Was Prof. Said Hussain your teacher? Oh, Sharuddin was. Well, you had the benefit of my student, who was, his teacher. Yeah, that's right. Yes, Sharuddin Maruf. Yes, yeah. Where is he now? Is he pension? But is he still attached to the Malay studies thing? No more. He was an extraordinary student, but very unique in his ways. His ways of doing things. I'm sure others know Sharuddin also.
Yes. Very
yeah, nice man. Yeah. Anyway, let's come back to this. Yeah, so I thought Singapore is a good example of a society where, whether we like it or not, the leadership has been popular with the people for a long while. You can't say it's just because of repression and oppression and so on. It is popular because I think the leadership has catered for a certain degree of justice. It has been able to ensure a certain degree of justice for the people of Singapore. And I suppose they feel that, their dignity as a people has been protected to a certain extent. And these things count in any society. Yeah. Just as, whatever one may say about Saddam Hussein was genuinely popular within segments of his society, and one of the reasons was because of the same factors. There was social justice, it had a first-class healthcare system, Iraq under Saddam Hussein and the Ba'athists, and education-wise, free education right up to the university and so on. Well, he did try to look after his people. Of course, he did terrible things too, which we don't forgive him for, right? But nonetheless, I think we have to see things in balance. It goes back to the earlier question too, There is a need for that sort of balance. The question about Asian values, actually, your next question, brother, was about Asian values. And Mahathir, of course, Lee Kuan Yew, another proponent of Asian values. These are two individuals. I don't agree with that concept. And I've written about it, that Asian values is, I think, intellectually, conceptually flawed. What are Asian values? When you say these are Asian values, when you say that, in the case of Singapore, Confucianism was part of the Asian values thing, and it was basically strong, dominant state, right? Which Lee Kuan Yew supported, paternalistic state. Because there is an element of paternalism in Confucianism, and he used that to justify paternalism. But in the case of Malaysia, I think Mahathir essentially argued that the individualism of the West was not acceptable, and he saw the articulation of human rights here especially civil and political rights in Malaysia, as an expression of individualism. I don't agree with Dr. Mahathir on that. I feel that the expression of civil and political rights in Malaysia, all along, going back to a few decades, it is not just that individualized notion of rights. I think people were genuinely concerned with the dignity of people. And as someone who was arrested under the ISA, I know what it means, because I think the Internal Security Act is a nullification, it's a negation of, basically human dignity. You're not given a trial, you're locked up, and you have to go through a certain degree of suffering because you're locked up. And that is a challenge to human dignity. And you can't justify that. It is not individualization of civil and political rights per se. And even when you look at an expression of the individualization of civil and political rights in Malaysia, which I suppose Dr. Mahathir and other government leaders in the past would be proud of, they would say elections, we've had elections all along and so on, yes. But even elections, they were not entirely free and fair. There were shortcomings in elections, serious shortcomings. So there are flaws of that sort, which is why I don't justify this Asian values concept to camouflage and conceal wrongdoings of this sort. Now, the question about is this from you, Azhar?
Several questions.
Sorry? Several questions, yeah. See, I sometimes have the problem of reading my own handwriting. So I'm wondering what this was, about...
I think
you remember the first of your...
What's your take on all this in academic circle? Right?
Oh yes, that's right.
Along the-
Yeah. I couldn't read the word academic. Yeah, that's right. It was the question about academe today and what it is like. I think it is a reflection of other changes that have taken place in the social sciences and humanities as a whole. That is what we have to look at. We have reached a point in academe where, if you look at, say, a major discipline within social sciences, economics. Economics is not concerned about social justice. The study of economics, I'm referring to the study of economics. What is it concerned about? It is concerned about measuring. How do you measure, including poverty, of course, you want to measure poverty, but that is a statistical exercise. No concern about what causes poverty, why there is a gap between the rich and poor. The questions that Piketty raised in his book on capital, these are questions which most economists are not concerned about. For them it is just measuring. Statistical approach to economics, and same thing in political science and in sociology. So these are the things which are important to us, but not real human suffering. I mean, you mentioned names like Sorokin and so on, that sort of concern doesn't exist. And I think we have to ensure, perhaps for the future, transformation of the social sciences and humanities. It must regain its commitment, which was there at one time, to values, to principles, to values. That is important. I mean, that's something which Professor Syed Hussain Alatas represented, and he was always against this change that had taken place in the social sciences. He himself was trained in political and social sciences in the early 50s in Holland, but Europe at that time had a commitment to values and principles. Now this change is, I think, linked to the rise of what we call neoliberal capitalism. It is the neoliberal capitalist system that has changed academia, the social sciences in particular. So you don't talk about poverty, injustice, and so on. If you do, then it's, as you put it, you're being too moral. Yeah, these are moral concerns. One should not be overwhelmed by moral concerns. So I think academia has to change. And then, of course, you raise this thing about an Islamic perspective. You know, people talk about human rights and they say this is Islamic and all that. I'm very much against giving that sort of label to the struggle for human dignity, for social justice. I don't think we should see it in terms of a particular religion. Yeah. There are issues and circumstances where we have to address, say, something that is more pertinent to one religion or religious community than another. That's understandable. Like when you look at the Rohingyas, you can't run away from the fact that they are followers of a particular religion. And that's one of the reasons why they are being targeted. So you have to address that issue. But when it comes to Palestine, for instance, I mean, this is why I think a sophisticated, mature approach is very important. When it comes to Palestine, I will not bring in a religious dimension. Because if you look at the whole struggle of the Palestinians, there are so many Christians who have been part of that struggle and who have sacrificed a great deal for that struggle. They themselves don't see it that way. People like Hawat May, George Habash, Hannah, Ashrawi, yeah? People like that. And of course Edward Said. They may not be Muslims, but they're deeply committed to the Palestinian struggle. Rohingya, in terms of both population and the way they have been targeted by the other side, it's a bit different. The Zionists have targeted the Christians also, including the places of worship in Bethlehem. So I think we should adopt a different approach when it comes to different situations. Generally, I would talk about dignity and social justice as human concerns. I think this is also one of the reasons why you find that very few Muslims speak up on issues pertaining to Latin America, even though it's so much a part of dominance and control and all the rest of it, but they don't, because they tend to see things in terms of their own religious kind, which I think is not right. One should go beyond one's own religious kind, focus upon your religious kind when it's justified. When it's not justified, when it is a question of human suffering and it's so obvious to everyone, then approach it from that point of view. Very quickly, I want to make this other point as far as this particular aspect of your question is concerned. Why is it that in Malaysia, and perhaps this is true of Singapore too, there are so few non-Muslims involved in the Palestinian struggle? We can't even get non-Muslims sometimes to attend programs on behalf of the Palestinians. I suspect it's the same in Singapore. Yeah. That Singapore, it's largely Muslims who are concerned about Palestine. And I think it is because the Muslims have also contributed to it. It is not just the other side. The other side is part of the problem. Because in Malaysia, religion is deeply colored by ethnicity. For a lot of non-Muslims, they see it as a Malay affair, which is totally wrong. And for a lot of Malays and Muslims, they see Palestine as something Muslim and excludes the others, which is not right. So I think we have to develop a broader perspective in looking at challenges of this sort, not just something confined to religion on each and every issue. Yeah, certain issues, yes, other issues, we have to take a broader perspective. You had this question, Azaha, about all those people in UKM, other universities, they don't use my writings and so on, It's true, the academics. But I think if you look at society as a whole, from what I know and from what my friends know, I think a lot of people are not at the universities, right? They do read. Not just my stuff, but other, writings, people who are of a different viewpoint. The people in academia, there may be a variety of reasons why they adopt that sort of attitude. Language, I don't think, is the major factor. Some of my writings are in Bahasa. They are in Bahasa, originally in Bahasa. And yet you find that they don't read even those things that are in Bahasa. Yeah? Well, it's partly because they don't like reading. That's a general problem. Academics is amazing. I've spent a couple of semesters in the past when I was teaching in local universities in American and British campuses. And I find the big difference is, when it comes to discussions in the common room, there's a huge difference between what Malaysian academics discuss and what academics elsewhere discuss. Malaysian academics are so concerned about the latest car and about, of course, food. All the while it's about food. So they're no different from other segments of Malaysian society. You will seldom hear someone talk about the latest work in a particular area. Like, let's say, someone writing about, say, human rights, or even some other areas. You find that there isn't much interest. That's part of the problem. So it's lack of interest in reading, lack of interest in ideas as such, right? And then they've already classified people, right? I mean, this guy, maybe, anti-government, or his thinking doesn't fit in with mainstream Malay society in some ways. There was a time when some people thought that I was pro-Shia. I suppose you have gone through it also. You just have to say something that's a bit different, and then you become, pro something or the other, which is utter, nonsense.
After this pro-Kadiani.
Sorry, come again?
After this pro-Kadiani.
Pro-Kadiani, yeah, perhaps. To give you an example of this, since this question has come up, just a few days ago, the Iranian foreign minister was in town, Jawad Zarif, Dr. Jawad Zarif, and he spoke at ISIS. I don't know whether any of you here attended his talk. He's someone I've known for many years, and he gave a brilliant talk. I've often said that Dr. Jawad Zarif is the most outstanding, intellectually outstanding foreign minister in the world today. His grasp of issues, his capacity, ability to analyze, and most of all, I think, his sincerity. Yeah? But in Malaysia, the first thing they will say is, "But he's Shia." It's very sad. It's very sad. So people don't really go beyond labels of that sort. And in Malaysia, I think we've all suffered from labels. That's also part of the reason. Lack of interest in reading, lack of interest in ideas, labeling all the while, and you find that as a result of that, there isn't much interest in ideas and so on. But nonetheless, there are groups here and there. Just a couple of months ago, I spoke to IGMAS in UKM, and the turnout, very good turnout, and lots of them were young people. And I got into a quarrel with a couple of them, which is good, which is what it should be, right? Exchange of ideas, disagree, and so on. But at least there was some interest of that sort. And the last question was from our lady about the kefahaman tentang hak asasi manusia. Perkataannya istilah hak dan cara istilah ini ditafsirkan. Memang betul bahawa ini adalah salah satu daripada cabaran yang kita menghadapi. Bahawa hak itu dikaitkan dengan soal-soal tertentu yang berhubung kait dengan ekonomi ataupun dengan hak memiliki sesuatu ataupun hak dalam bidang ekonomi, dan juga hak ekonomi dalam konteks nikah. Dalam konteks nikah mereka memahami. tetapi hak sebagai hak asasi manusia seperti mana difahami oleh pihak-pihak lain, ya, ini menjadi satu masalah besar. Dan mungkin kita memerlukan istilah yang lebih menyeluruh, yang dapat merangkumi dimensi-dimensi yang dipinggirkan dalam kefahaman sebahagian besar daripada masyarakat Melayu tentang peniham. Dan itulah sebabnya kalau kita cuba memahami keadaan kita ini dari segi maruah, kemuliaan insan. Ya, kemuliaan insan itu mungkin lebih tepat daripada maruah. Ya, kemuliaan insan. Dan sekiranya kita memahami hak ini dari segi kemuliaan insan, mungkin kita dapat, ya, memajukan konsep ini, kemuliaan insan. Bahawa ini yang dimaksudkan kita. Sebahagian daripada kemuliaan insan berhubung kait dengan rights, sebahagian mungkin berhubung kait dengan tanggungjawab. Ya. Dan itulah sebabnya saya berpendapat bahawa istilah amanah untuk menjelaskan aspek-aspek tertentu mungkin lebih tepat, lebih tinggi tahap manfaat sekiranya kita gunakan istilah amanah. Itulah sebabnya masa saya anggota dalam lembaga pengarah Institute Integrity, saya tak setuju dengan penggunaan istilah integrity. Saya minta mereka kalau boleh tukar istilah itu, gunakan istilah amanah, Institute Amanah, bukan Institute Integrity. Integrity itu kebanyakan masyarakat kita tak faham apa yang dimaksudkan dengan integrity, ya. Tapi amanah mereka faham, ya, kerana amanah itu ada dia punya, ya, dari segi dia punya makna, dari segi dia punya arti, ya, dia ni ada dimensi agama dalam istilah amanah. Dan istilah amanah ini dari satu segi boleh digunakan oleh semua kaum. Mereka pun faham amanah. Itulah sebabnya kalau kita tengok pada sejarah istilah itu, ya saudara, dalam konteks negara kita, yang mula-mula menggunakannya dari segi politik adalah Dr. Mahathir pada tahun 81. Bila beliau menjadi Perdana Menteri, dia yang memperkenalkan idea BCA, bersih, cekap, amanah. Dia dan Tun Musa Hitam, Perdana Menteri, Timbalan Perdana Menteri pada masa itu. Itu yang hari itu saya pernah tanya Dr. Mahathir, ya, apa jadi pada BCA? Itulah masalah kita ini, kan, ya. Kita gunakan istilah, lepas tu, ya, kita ya, mengabaikannya, kita, ya, melahirkan istilah-istilah baru, ya, merekakan istilah-istilah baru, tetapi kita belum dapat menjawab soalan ini. Kenapa BCA itu gagal? Kenapa BCA itu gagal? Kenapa kita perlu bangkitkan semula amanah ini sebagai satu cermin kata negara? Walhal kita dah ada BCA dulu. Itulah kita punya masalah. Seperti mana juga kita mengenepikan rukun negara, semua kita mengenepikannya, kita tak memperjuangkan sesuatu secara sungguh-sungguh, ya. Memang tepat, ya, yang dalam budaya Melayu, kan, this idea of hangat-hangat tai ayam. Memang hangat-hangat tai ayam, everything that we do. Okay.